Hey, okay, ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. Very, very casual. My name is Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
I am James, also known as Aramithius.
And I'm Andrew, also known as the White Guar.
And Nicolas Cage is a national treasure. And today we're talking about all the miscellaneous Mannish races that we haven't discussed in detail before, but there just isn't, hi Slove, there just isn't enough, stuff written about them to really do an entire cast. I mean, I was actually kind of tempted to try to scrape together a full lore cast about the Kothringi, but... Yeah, the only thing that I could come up with that was really all that detailed about them was the that thing that MK posted during the ARG, the script for the television show in the Fifth Era. So yeah, Elder Scrolls lore people having beards. It's true. Yeah, even people who don't have beards can have beards. Yeah.
Mine grows too patchy.
Yeah, well, what you gonna do?
I've tried. I looked like Shaggy for a while.
Somebody's just showed up. Who's that?
After that?
What's up?
Oh, hello.
Hi, Dylan.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. So I just brought them up anyway, so let's just start talking about the Kothringi. What we know about them is sparse, but we know that they, and somebody please, the fastest way to learn something is to say something incorrect on the internet and then wait for somebody to correct you. So I'm going to say that the Kothringi are based heavily, if not dominantly, in Cyrodiil.
Blackmarsh.
Yeah,
Blackmarsh. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, was that it was, if it's not Cyrodiil, then it's at least southern Cyrodiil, Black Marshy area.
Yeah. They're indigenous. According to the UESP, that's what I'm looking at.
Oh, good. Okay.
It says they're indigenous to Black Marsh. Plus, you run into them in Shadowfen, I think,
Yes.
in Elder Scrolls Online.
I just did a quest a little while ago with one of
The
them.
last tribe of them.
Yeah. There's some isolated pocket of them that happen to survive the Nahatan flu.
Yeah. How do you pronounce that?
Nahatan? That's how they pronounce it.
Nahatan. Okay. All right. I'm sure that somebody pronounced it in ESO and then I just missed it, and but I kept pronouncing the K, so that makes more sense. Nahatan. Yeah. So they are known for having silver skin, and my recollection of them is that their culture is relatively big air quotes primitive.
Yeah, they're very primal.
Yeah, very tribal.
I would almost compare them to like Ashlanders in a way.
Yeah.
Intentionally
tribal, or?
Yeah, I mean they seem to have an affinity for nature and adding bones into their
armor
outfits,
and clothing,
whatever. Yeah.
Or are they just Mannish Argonians?
Well, where do you think they got their silver skin from? Maybe they've been licking hist. It's possible that it's almost certain that the Kothringi culture has been inspired by Argonian culture.
Yes.
And it's almost certain that a certain amount of bleed happened between the two of them in general, like the Kothringi inspired the Argonians as well. But we don't really have any... From visual appearance, at the very least, from the Kothringi that we see in ESO, they certainly look like they got the lion's share of the inspiration from Argonians, which makes a lot of sense. They're based out of the southern areas, Black Marsh, and so on. I seem to recall reading, or I might be wrong about this, but I seem to recall something about them also being one of the races that were enslaved by the Aelids.
I don't know whether the Aelids got as far as Black Marsh though.
Yeah.
There were the Barsabic Aelids. In the Shadowfen area. That's why I think Stormhold is an Aeliad ruin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing anything about any conflict with the Aelids, really.
Yeah. Well, Kuyo points out correctly, and this rings a bell, that they have a lot of knowledge of Aeliad magic. Like, maybe not practical knowledge, like applicable knowledge, but they have a lot of knowledge of, don't sniff around in there, of how they work and what they do and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you'd assume that they kind of got it from somewhere. Although, I'm now trying to think about just general race of other races in Black Marsh in general, and for whatever reason, the Aliads seem to have connections with various bits of Black Marsh. Now I think about it, because one of the questions that came out when Black Rose Prison in ESO was that they were thinking, is it something to do with the Lil Moth? But it turns out that it was built by a Direni contractor, basically. So
that's a vision.
Yeah, the Akaviri potentates said just employed some Direni to build it.
Yeah, there's no reason why the government should be able to do it. We'll get a private company to do it.
It's the Argonian account, Mirish version.
Right, yeah.
But yeah. But yeah, because you've got though, I was kind of thinking, because you've got those sorts of connections with that sort of elvishness, that is there something going on in terms of Black Marsh that's giving that, rather than the Kothringi as such. Just that would be my knee-jerk reaction, but that doesn't happen until the potentates, which is after the flu.
Well, and I think it should be pointed out, I don't know how this is going to color that idea, but the Kothringi aren't the only native race of men to Black Marsh. There are at least 3 other tribes, there's 3 other groups that we know of that aren't really fleshed out. There's the Orma is one of them. I'm trying to scan here for all the others. They have weird names and they're hard to remember. The Orma is one of them. They're a race predisposed to blindness, apparently.
That's just what you need in a lethal marsh.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to find the others. I remember I found them at one point and I tried looking them up, and I couldn't quite pull up a whole lot other than that they're men that live in Black Marsh.
LJ's asking for an invite, so I'm going to do that, but while I do it, I'm going to blank out the screen.
I did shoot him. He pings me and then it doesn't make a noise.
Do we know what the Kothringi's pantheon was like? Because I know that they worship Zen and Dibella.
Yeah. Which is, and they use those terms, right? That they definitely use the term Zen rather than Zenithar.
Yeah, they worship the Bosmeri view of Zenithar.
So how on earth did that get there? They've got. I need to refresh my mind as to where Valenwood is in relation to that. But you've got the widest point of the Niben, at least, between Black Marsh and Valenwood. So how on earth you've got that kind of cultural dissemination? Yeah. No, Valenwood is entirely on the other side of southern Morrowind. So, so how on earth you've got Bosmeri deities in the Kothringi? Can we just chalk that up to bad writing, please? It's easier.
Well, it might be that the Kothringi were no. Well, I mean, it's a. I was about to say something about, like, adjacent provinces and stuff, but I mean, you don't see any bleed between Nordic gods and Dunmer.
No. Yeah, it's a relatively simple coastal hop.
And they have ships.
Yeah. So you can just go
across.
Yeah, I don't know. Also known as Mori points out that there's a Kothringi mentioned in the 2920 books that says that his skin is not only silver but reflective.
You may have to turn up LJ a little bit.
Oh, I can't.
Yeah,
you can't do that in Hangouts. I'm pretty sure. Let me see.
Because I know when I do Hangouts, it's a little control panel on the left, and it'll let you.
Yeah, I mean, I got chat, but that's it.
Okay.
Yep, nothing doing.
If we are kind of assuming that we've got the needs, or not the needs, sorry, the Kothringi having some contact with Valenwood and how they conceive it, are we then looking at a kind of the race before the Kothringi? I went to Needs because they almost had a Tamrielic empire of their own. They got as far as Hammerfell, and invaded Morrowind, and went to High Rock as well. So, if you're thinking about it in those terms, are the Kothringi just a very, very isolated and divergent Need offshoot that had the basis of the Needs, which somehow or other picked up Zen before the Kothringi were the Kothringi?
Well, if that was the case, we'd see some inspiration of the Theban culture in them.
Yeah, but we don't.
No.
So, well, unless Zen is just simply Proto-Zenithar, and all memory of Zen is overwritten.
All right. This is a stretch, but sure.
Yeah, I know.
I've heard worse ideas, so yeah. Let's see. So beyond what we get in ESO about the Kothringi, there's just the occasional mention in as like, you know, background characters in other books.
Yeah, they only kind of crop up really in passing. Even doing a keyword search for them turns up vanishingly little.
Oh yeah, Torvald the pilot mentions him in his writing.
Ooh.
And I think in the same section where he's talking about the aliens, the bird people.
The birdman, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hang on. What is the text on the Father of the Nibbon? Let's check that while we can, because we have the internets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, men learn how to speak their own words.
I'm glad you guys are looking this up. If I did it on my computer, the whole internet would be able to see how many porn tabs I have open.
No. There's nothing explicitly in there about the Kothringi, but you've got a race of men learning to speak their own words and learning to write with taloned feet in the same region as the birdmen, I think.
Okay.
But that's about all we have.
I'm beginning to suspect that Torvald the pilot might have been on some bad mushrooms.
Yeah, well, he did have a very interesting trip.
Mm-hmm.
So
didn't actually go anywhere. He just stayed in the boat and ate mushrooms and threw up a lot.
Oh, Toval. Opposed to Topal. Oh.
Topal, yeah. No.
Cursed hominophones.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Oh, no, it is Topal. Okay. Mm-hmm. Confusion over. Or Torval.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Torval's a city in elsewhere. That's
Okay.
It's Topal the pilot.
Yes.
Topal the pilot,
okay.
yes.
Confusion over. Thank
yeah,
you
a little bit of confusion on my end. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Topal.
All good.
Topal.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of that's about it really. I mean, we've basically just covered the entire Kothringi culture in 20 minutes. That's how long it takes, folks.
Yep.
I mean, there were some other kind of tidbits I see in the UESP article. One being that their name is the Lustrous Folk.
Ooh.
Which is interesting because if in other race names we get Mer, meaning folk.
Right.
The Dwem Mer, the Dun Mer, the Kain Mer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering what language that is that Kothringi, that part of that word means the same thing that Mer means. Unless it's their own language. You mentioned how they made their own words.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or I mean, something I was kind of thinking about a minute ago is I've always kind of been confused about the Kothringi and like their origins because we just don't know. But I'm wondering if they're native to Black Marsh in the same way the Hist are, and that they came from one of the 12 worlds of creation.
Ooh.
Oh.
Which makes them not men categorically because they're not the wandering Alnothay
but conceivably, but conceivably alien like the Hist.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it's really because they obviously have some overlaps with man, like they appear to be men, which means their ideology must be similar to men. So
Right.
maybe they are like a splinter group of wandering Elnathay that ended up in Black Marsh after Mundus was created. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I can feel Kirkbride in my head trying to remind us that the wandering Elnathay is not supposed to be, the word wandering is not supposed to be taken literally, that they wandered from the culture or from, home. Apparently Metro Exodus is having save game corruption issues. That's a shame.
Slovakines brought up that they might be another branch of the forest people,
Right.
as in the proto Bosmer / Khajiiti lot.
Oh.
That side of things,
Huh.
which really makes the forest people a real mixed bag of, are they wanderers, are they old, how the hell do you process them?
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm back to the fact that Bosmer aren't elves.
Right.
Sorry, I'm predisposed to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because I like to believe the Khajiit when I can.
Well, also, I don't. I'm spiraling off again here, but there's the argument that some people have made that the Bosmer were never elves; they're just beasts who take on elvish shape.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah. If you read the Bosmeri early mythology,
The ooze.
it sort of sounds a little bit like that's kind of where they're headed with it, which was that the Bosmer were originally beasts that then took on human form or marish form.
Although I do feel obliged to point out that Michael would then point out that in the Khajiiti myth, the beings that could not decide what their form was are listed as men.
Right.
So
yeah,
if Bosmer might be men.
So that makes Bosmer not elves. Yeah.
And which would make Kothringi also men if they're from the same.
True. But it would also make Khajiiti men as well.
Men. Yeah.
And also probably Argonians.
If you think of Argonians being from that same thing. But yeah.
So, yeah. An odd idea. Maury's also bringing up the water-getting girl and the inverse tiger, which is, a very interesting piece of text. If you guys if anybody hasn't read it, you need to get your ass out there and get it.
Yep.
Oh, that's a Kirkbride. I'd never even heard of this. I will have to partake later.
It's one of the ones that I can't remember what Daria said exactly. I'm not going to misquote her.
Yeah. Tiber Septim's favorite bedtime story.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that absolutely works. Okay, if we've wrung all we can out of the Kothringi, shall we move on to the next lot?
Yeah, who you want to do next?
Well, the ones that I had down were either the needs in the sense of pure needs,
the
ones that seem to crawl absolutely everywhere, or the Reachmen.
Well, I think we have a lot more information about the Reachmen than anything else.
Yeah.
In the respect that they're a lot of fun to beat on.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
I mean, do you think we should start with the needs first, since we have less information, in case? Because I don't know that we want Reachmen to trample over needs and then we never get to needs.
Well, I think we should talk about the needs because I would actually save the Reachmen for the next cast because we're thinking about doing two of these. So.
Right.
So somebody talk to me about the Nedic stuff.
Sure. They are the potentially either the first or several similarly timed migrations from Atmora, if you believe some people. If you believe others, then they are native to Tamriel, in which you get support from some places on either perspective. The sources tend to lean towards them being an early Atmoran migration, but the way that the needs at the Hammerfell get talked about is kind of interesting. The word Aboriginal comes up, which makes me think, did they start from Hammerfell and then go elsewhere? Because they did spread pretty much everywhere. We have the Needs in High Rock. We have the Needs in Cyrodiil that will then become the Nibonese. And then you've also got the... Oh, LJ, you're saying something, are you?
I am not. I'm smoking.
Oh, okay, fair enough. It's getting sound coming up. But yeah, you get the Needs coming up and at least being in a position to invade Morrowind, which makes me think that they either came... Well, I can't think where it is in ASO, precisely where Dishan is off the top of my head in terms of Morrowind's overall geography.
Oh, Dishan, I was just there.
It encompasses Mournhold.
Okay, so they would have come from the south. It would have been from the Heartland side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so take Vardenfell, go south a bit, that coastline area there, that Stone Falls, and then just south of there, that chunk, yeah.
Okay, so
immediately above Shadowfen, yeah.
Yeah, so they would have come from Cyrodiil in that particular migration, and yeah, that's pretty much where they've all gone. They seem to be the Mannish race that leaves the most behind. There's tons of archaeological digs that ESO is picking up on, in terms of looking at Nedic culture that seems to kind of work out to be monolithic, or at least have monoliths and various stoneworks that can be looked at, that seem to be intent on harnessing the power of the stars, which I think is really interesting. Because if you look at the parallels with the Aliens as well, they were big on harnessing starlight and mucking around with it that way. The way that the Celestials is put across in the Skyreach Explorer, is it? I can't remember the precise name. But they say that the way that the starlight was potentially being... the takeaway that I had was that starlight was being trapped in various Nedic structures, or something being extracted from the earth by those structures, and that created the Celestials in a way, so that you're getting kind of starlight and the magicka thereof being condensed into kind of proto-Magna Gay who kind of half remember what they are. That's the vision I had of the Celestials, but it got the feeling that it was the Nedic monuments that were doing that, which again ties them to the whole notion of the stars and the reverence that they had for the stars, which they share with the Aliens, which is a little interesting in terms of their cultural attitudes. It's just that the Needs didn't build towers.
This is I'm reading something on UESP that's related to that, about how the Needs were apparently I did not know this until I literally... Oh, hey LJ.
Is that better?
Are you talking about audio?
Yeah.
No, you're still pretty quiet.
I think it's just my voice.
Oh. Yeah, it's still very hard to hear though. I was going to say that they have apparently had a thriving culture in Hammerfell, which is news to me.
Yeah, there's only a handful of places that actually talk about it, because I don't imagine that the Red Guards are that fond of letting archaeologists into all these forbidden places that make people ceremonially unclean when they go near them and stuff. At least that's my reasoning for it.
We're talking about the Keptu in Hammerfell, because they were in Hammerfell as well. The Keptu, also referred to only as Keptu, one of the many breeds of men that inhabited central Hammerfell by the time of the Second Empire, and were described along the Ashlanders of Morrowind, Reachmen of Western Reach, and Kothringi of Blackmarsh as barbaric races.
Ooh.
And I know there are types of armor. I mean, my impression is that they're compared to the Nedic. The Nedic people. I know there's a costume I've got. It's like a Nedic Keptu armor is what it's called, and that's
we've got some quick after some quick searching, the Adabala, which is talking about Elysia for the most part, does mention the Keptu in that, as along with the same breath, something called the Men of Gi. which makes me ring some serious bells if we're thinking that, although it does also have need as a separate type of man as well. Also, hang on. It says where the aliens herded in men from across all the Niben. Kothri, Need, Algemha, men of Kreeth, Keptu, men of Gi, Al-Harad, men of Ket, and others. So that's your thought for where the Kothringi at least started.
Yeah.
But it kind of feels like the Niben is a place that spawns vast amounts of different types of men. Are we looking at, which is a little weird for a river? You'd expect a river to kind of homogenize things a little.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
That's sort of what we're seeing with, like, in the real world with, like, you know, culture up and down the Mississippi, for example. Is, you know, shit rolls downhill is kind of the rule there.
Yeah.
We're also mentioned in Katnuke, in the PG too.
Okay.
With their weird bull drawings, they had like a weird fascination with Morris.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of interesting because this, to presage the Reachman talk, they kind of they said that they took in Minotaurs and such as well. So are these guys also taking in the outcasts of Cyrodiilic society? If we're going to go along that route, stop smiling like that.
Did they take him? Did they take him in? Did they take him deep in?
Oh.
Apparently, I did find in the Adabala, the men of Gi are mentioned, and it implies that they were native to the Niben, and that they were eventually destroyed when the Flower King Nilichi made a great sacrifice to an insect god named Lost, which I wonder if that's Lorcan, but
there's part of me that's thinking it's just some Daedra who just got a bit too big for his boots.
Maybe. I mean, but when I see anything insect and
Scarabs.
strange, well, yeah, well, I think either Scarab or Prophet of the Landfall, but I mean, I don't know what the connection would be here.
Yeah,
it's just a normal connection. Every time I think insect, I think Xrib. That weird fucking the Palmer had. You should have fun with that.
I'll be right back.
Oh dear. Yeah. Okay. But what else do we think in terms of the needs? It's they obviously were relatively unified. I mean, hearing about the various different types of tribes that go around all the rivers and that sort of thing, and the fact that they kind of spread everywhere, it kind of rings off goth bells in my head. But
Go ahead.
But that might just be because I'm listening to vast amounts of Roman history podcasts at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, they tend to have their fingers all over the place, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, it almost feels like they're. I mean, to my mind, like based on the descriptions of you know where they're at, I kind of feel like they may be centered either around like Lake Rumer, and then they spread out there because that's a nice central area, and that's, you know, the Niben, the Niben is that river right there that goes all the way down to the Topol Sea. But I mean, we know. I feel like they've influenced Reachman. I mean, we know they've reached as far as Black Marsh, because actually the Kothringi are mentioned as a race of needs in the Adabala.
Yes.
And so it's interesting that they're kind of a blanket race of man that's all over the place.
Yeah.
And the only place that I don't think they really have any sort of influence is Somerset Isles and maybe Valenwood.
Yeah. No,
maybe Morrowind too.
Well, they tried with Morrowind and they got they had a very, very vicious war, which I don't know. I don't know if it's too blunt to call it a war of extermination or something. But the tactics they used against the the Dunmer at that point, or were they Chimer then? I can't quite remember. But the attacks they used against the Mer of Morrowind at that point were not nice.
Yeah.
At least,
Well, I
at
mean,
least in the way that
they've also had beef with orcs. They've had issues with the Regatta.
well, Hammerfell. So
Yeah.
If you're living in
let's see.
Hammerfell, you got beef with the Regatta.
Yeah, Nedic culture prospered
Yeah.
for centuries in the Deathlands.
To
The
be
needs were-
fair,
Yeah.
if an entire race just came out of nowhere and just tried to kill you all, I'll have a little beef with them too.
yeah.
Well, I'm just saying you either have beef with the Regatta or you get really good about making way.
Hmm.
Figure out a way to do it right. Everything's gonna be cool.
Yep.
Well, in Craglorn, in the Craglorn area of ESL, you deal with the Celestials.
Right.
In those main quests there, and it says that the Needs were known to be devout star worshippers. So I'm wondering if that bit of the Craglorn I'm wondering if that's a bit of culture that was appropriated by the Red Guards from the Needs.
Maybe.
In the way that warring cultures tend to do that. They steal from each other.
Yeah. Well, also, the Needs really used to get it from the Dureni pretty hard. So that like you can't help but appropriate some culture that way as well. I mean, culture appropriates. It's like memes. You know, I mean, they spread. And if you're in the process of just living next door to people, you know, you're gonna absorb a little bit of their culture, and then if they freaking enslave you and torture you and so on, you're gonna pick up stuff as well, even if it's involuntarily, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it seems to me that the Needs were majorly enslaved by the aliens, which I imagine would presuppose that they are the progenitors of Imperials, Colovians, and Nibonese.
Yeah.
Because if the Needs were a major race that the aliens enslaved, and Lesia came from that group.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's stated outright in Oblivion, isn't it? That the Needs and the Colovians were the two, peoples that came together to form what we now call Cyrodiil.
Because I know the Colovians and the Nibonese, those two groups, those were kind of mashed together to create Imperials.
Yeah.
Because in I think pre-Morrowind, I want to say, Imperials as a race did not exist.
Right.
Yeah.
They were basically a mashup of Colovians and Nibonese. And the Colovians and Nibonese, I don't know if they were playable in Daggerfall or Arena, but
they were not.
Yeah, but they were there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and, you know,
the way that the Cyrodiil stuff gets divided up, you get the Needs and you get the Cyro-Nords, which then translates to the Needs becoming the Nibonese. Abner Tharn is very, very proud of his heritage as a nearly pure blood Need, and then the Cyro-Nords become the Colovians. Because they're a closer mixture of the Needs that were around Cyrodiil and the later migration that became the Nords, which and I feel like they should possibly correct some things that we were saying earlier, which might clarify some of the stuff that's in the Adabala, which is in the Lawmaster's archive, the Slave Rebellion questions, was that the term Nedic tribes actually covers a wide panoply of different human cultures from different parts of Atmora, with a variety of traditions and practices. So they were potentially different to begin with. Although if they are different by the time they get to Cyrodiil and around the Nibbon, that's a bit of a roundabout way to get to Tamriel from Atmora. You'd kind of have to go entirely to the south and up and do that multiple times.
You also have I always found the whole Almora theory weird in the first place, because if they did came from Almora, then why isn't there any like books, research, or anything about how the Needs interact with the Snow Elves, so they were actually there before the Nords were. Which
That's true.
That kind of puts a little hole in there because I wouldn't think they would like go straight around. They would have to, some of them probably let's just go from the north and go south. And
Yeah.
I don't think the Snow Elves would have been like happy with that.
No, there'd certainly be some record of it at least. But
Would there? I mean, we're talking about an extraordinarily long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, true, but
Mm.
I mean, we can if the Nords still have, we killed everything here. I think there would at least be like at least one surviving fragment of, the Snow Elves. They saw the Needs and they were like, "Hey guys, what's up?"
Yeah, particularly if you go with the line that frontier conquest and accommodation tries to spin, that the wave of Atmorans that were the Nords were the only violent ones, or at least the only ones that violently opposed the Mer. The race that would become the Needs as such would have kind of peacefully passed through, and so I would expect some kind of reaction from I've forgotten his name, not Vither, the one that actually talks sense. Gelabor. I would expect something from him to say that it was bizarre that the Nords acted that way because men otherwise have been so nice. I would expect some contrast in there, but but he doesn't mention that at all. It's not. It doesn't seem like they've had any contact with any men apart from the Nords, which is just odd. Given, as you say, it's just easier to land there.
Maybe they ran from the Nords? It's a thought. They might have been fleeing Nordic oppression. That's possible. Or they stemmed from... See, because the whole... I don't buy for a second that the Nords were the original men who came down from Atmora. I don't buy that at all. But...
yeah,
at the same time, I have to entertain the possibility that it's true. So when you talk about things that, like a race of people who ran from the Nords, it's possible that they were Nords. That they fled in the same way that, Protestants fled from England or something,
Yeah, although I really struggle with trying to find things that that talk about men originating on Tamriel. There's developer comments to that effect. I think there's things like Kurt Corman, and I know there's comments from MK that talk about the out of Atmora theory being absolute rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
But there's very little in-universe stuff that suggests that. There's a passing comment here and there, but that's it.
Because we know that at least from the out of the game context that according to the developers, the whole out of Mora theory originated because back when Alicia was trying to get support from the Nords, back during the first era, she was like, hey, we're men, you're men, we all came from the same place, come help us beat these guys at us. So of course the Empire is trying to spin that narrative that we all came from the same place, so the Nords can be like, yeah, we all. No, that's why the Nords had such a big ingrained kind of loyalty to the Empire because they believe that the Cyrodiils are actually just Southern Nords. So it makes sense that the Empire would kind of like cover that up, or at least a little bit.
Well, with the Colovians, they're at least kind of right.
Yeah.
But. But yeah.
I don't know. Well, we've got I'm trying to think of what else we could talk about when it comes to the Needs.
Can we talk about how the warrior was a stand user?
What?
Talk about the what now?
No. You said the warrior was a stam user?
Oh. Last thing in the world you want to get me to start talking about is combat balance in ESO. I'm a very bitter and angry man.
I mean, it was just this joke that we were talking about fucking I forgot in this old chat. We were talking about like the Celestials and everything. And you know how like that's another thing I actually could bring up too. Kind of came out of a fucking meme, but the Celestials are apparently avatars, or the Needs were able to send certain individuals into being avatars of the stars.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that the warrior one is Yukuden, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, right.
So, he can I say he's a stand user because he can manifest like spiritual people. He can like spiritual people to fight for him. But I thought that was kind of weird and kind of interesting that you have all the rest of them basically look like Needs, and they got the warrior one who's Yukuden.
Ooh.
They also made a fucking dragon
Yeah.
too. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now this podcast is about 50% LJ ceiling and
there
his
is
ceiling nipple.
Just hearing that comment of kind of again going back to the thought of the Needs creating the Celestials. I've just been reminded just to drag it into 40k because this is what we do. Reminded of the way that the Eldar potentially created their gods as weapons against the Catan. The way that the Celestials kind of rampage around, destroying everything, and almost they don't really act on orders or with any kind of coherent plan apart from whinging about wanting to go home.
The Eldar created Slanesh.
Yeah, but before that point, bear with me. The gods of their pantheon. I've heard a conspiracy theory that all the things like Kalamancha Kane and Aisha and Kurnos and all that lot were created by the old ones as warp weapons to fight the Catan.
Oh.
I'm suggesting something because within that conception that was going around at that time, the Catan were weak to warp energy and that sort of thing. So it's just it's a way of weaponizing kryptonite. And so I'm thinking, were the Needs doing something similar with the way they were harnessing starlight to intentionally create the Celestials? There's some sense of them potentially worshipping the Celestials, but is that in this model, is that potentially being conflated with the idea of they worship the stars, which is the stuff that made the Celestials, or did they build the things
and then worship them?
Forget what they were for?
In
the same way that the Eldar did,
or entirely the same way that the Mechanicus does.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of strikes me as a possibility, but it's a very, very vague one.
Yeah, like Numidium. Well, Numidium sort of, not exactly. I mean, what we're talking about here is that it'd be a little bit like, it'd be a little bit like, if Dagoth created Akulakhan, and then people worshipped Akulakhan as well or instead of Dagoth.
Well, I was only responding to the idea that artificially creating gods. And that's all I was responding to.
Yeah, well, and the point is that artificially created gods are not out of the question in the Elder Scrolls universe.
Yeah.
That we kind of, in a way, if we thought about it, we could probably come up with some. like I think you could argue that there are, like a golden calf. Michael Ziegler's not here, so I don't want to say yes or no.
Well, the idea, if you're looking at the golden calf in particular, the idea with that is that the golden calf is either fake or not meant to be worshipped at all, even if it represents a particular entity. The way that it's presented in the Exodus narrative is, hey, Moses has gone away. We're getting bored now. Can you make us a god, something to play with, please?
Mm-hmm.
And then Aaron is just like, yeah, sure, give me all your gold and I'll make you something.
Yeah.
It's something that's portrayed within the Hebrew narrative as being very definitely false and not real.
I showed up to this party in the desert to worship me a god. I'll be damned if I'm going to go home without getting my worship on.
Yeah.
Somebody whip me up one real quick.
Yeah, and so they're just going to worship anything, even if it's not a god as such. So I don't think the golden calf is quite is quite comparable, unless it's a question of within the Hebrew narrative and I'm not a Bible scholar, so this is going to go
Exactly, which is why I'm kind of like I wanted to defer to and you've also got my whole thing about all the stuff in the Old Testament is allegorical anyway, so it doesn't matter. But whatever.
Yeah, but unless it's a question of misappropriating an authority that is right and good and does exist, but it's not meant to be used in that way, which isn't really what the Dwemer were doing.
That's a good idea. Yeah. And in a way that was what the Dwemer were doing. Yeah. It was tech worship, wasn't it? It was the Dwemer were just marrying their iPods. That's what it was.
that guy in My Strange Addiction who married his car.
Yeah. Wants to have sex with his car. Yeah. That's right. Exactly.
Let's be connected all the time. Let's upload ourselves to WhatsApp.
Mm-hmm. Let's upload ourselves to Google Cloud.
Yay.
They'll never shut that service down.
But yeah,
needs.
Unless we want to plunge into Reachman, I think we've mined this as far as we can go.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we have. Well, we've just about hit an hour, so technically speaking, our obligations are fulfilled. Well, I mean, we knew this was going to be a little sketchy today anyway. Yeah. I mean, there was not a whole lot of information about the stuff we were going to talk about. So I would like some feedback on anybody watching this video through any channel that you're observing or listening to this podcast. We are thinking about branching off for a couple of one-offs to talk about other video games other than Elder Scrolls. I used to cast on this channel as under the pretext that every game I play was an Elder Scrolls game, even the ones that aren't, especially the ones that aren't. And I kind of want to get a much more organized cast or series of casts, uncharacteristically organized, about Warframe lore, which is very symbolically consistent and has a lot of parallels with Gnostic symbolism. So Elder Scrolls fans will be interested in that. And Dark Souls, or the Dark Souls trilogy in general, which also has a great deal of symbols that move between Elder Scrolls and, other things.
Gotta do Bloodborne too.
I'm sorry? Bloodborne? Oh, I don't know that much about Bloodborne, so I didn't want to say, but I hear that Bloodborne, would work.
I'll tell you, Michael Ziegler will be all over No Man's Sky.
Yeah. Oh, no. Don't even get me started about No Man's Sky, especially when it came out. On launch, it was one big Gnostic philosophy, discourse. It was awesome. Now it's a little bubbled, but can I get Vatty on the cast? If I can fucking get Vatty video on this cast, I will fucking do it. I would love Vatty. At the very least, I just want him to say things and then I would fall asleep listening to him. Lovely voice. Exactly. So anyway, I just want people's feedback about whether that's something you guys would be interested in. It is Vatty Vidya. If you don't know who Vatty is, go on YouTube and Google "Prepare to Cry" or just probably Dark Souls lore in general, and you are definitely going to run into a Vatty video. He is kind of like the unofficial de facto expert on Dark Souls lore. He makes really, really great videos, and if you start all the way at the beginning, you can literally watch an evolution of his idea of what the Dark Souls universe is and what the plot lines are and who the characters are, and you can literally watch that idea evolve through Dark Souls 1 into Dark Souls 2 and then at the end of Dark Souls 3, and it's actually really fascinating. It's a fantastic series. It's a great channel. I highly recommend you sub to it. Go ahead and smash that LB on his YT. And if you, as the kids say, and
those kids.
Yeah, and I would, if we could get him on the cast, then it would basically consist of me asking him questions and then interpreting it back into Elder Scrolls lore terminology. Because he's very, very good. So anyway, let me know if you have any other games that you think might be good. for us to analyze, give me a heads up. I can't think of any. I've been thinking about it for a while, and aside from Dark Souls and
World of Warcraft.
Dark Scrolls, Lore Frame, Halo.
not Halo. No. Yeah, Warframe and Dark Souls are about the only two I can think of. Oh, there's a game called Xenoclash, which I highly recommend you guys play. It almost looks like it was made by Kirkbride, but it wasn't. Which is also really good, but it's not in-game book series. No, that's definitely a good idea. Well, I mean, we'll of course we'll have additional Elder Scrolls casts after this. I'm not talking about these are not the last casts we're ever going to do. We're going to keep we got plenty more to go. But yeah.
Are we talking about comparing like literature to Elder Scrolls? Is that what the suggestion is?
Well, Maury was suggesting in-game books, like us doing shows exclusively about 2920, for example. Or,
gotcha. Okay,
yeah.
okay. Because I was gonna say I've been reading the King Killer Chronicles, and there's some awesome like magic philosophy in there that's fucking sweet.
Okay. Yeah.
And so.
But yeah. So anyway, yeah. Let us know.
We have a suggestion of Prey from Quayo.
Is there like that? I didn't see a whole lot of symbolism in Prey. So unless I missed something, it just sort of seemed vaguely like. I mean, you could kind of talk about like I like, for example, I could talk about BioShock, and sort of talk about the alien critters in BioShock 2, as being like a. You know, a little bit like the. Oh, you could talk for days about Prey. Okay, well, shoot me an email or something. PM me on Twitch or whatever you want, and give me an idea of where to go with that. But that, yeah. So any suggestions you guys can have for me would be great. But Dark Souls and Warframe are definitely two big ones for the general philosophy that we try to and metaphysics that we try to do a lot of on these casts. So anyway, that's going to do us for today. Everybody wave goodbye. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.
I'm staring in goodbye.